The crystalline silence that descended upon the grand ballroom of the Edelgard Hotel was a physical entity. It had weight, pressing down on the 1,000 guests in their bespoke suits and couture gowns. It smothered the lingering scent of seared scallops and vintage champagne. The gentle jazz quartet had faded into nothingness, their instruments held mid-note, their eyes wide. This was the annual Vance Innovations Gala, an event orchestrated with the same ruthless precision as a product launch, a celebration of a year of flawless execution. And now, at its center, was a flaw. On the brilliantly lit stage, behind a lectern of shimmering crystal, stood 11-year-old Leo Vance. He was a miniature of his father, Julian Vance, the same dark hair, the same intense eyes. But where Julian radiated an aura of unshakable control, Leo was visibly crumbling. His small hands gripped the sides of the lectern so tightly his knuckles were white. His mouth opened, but only a choked, repetitive sound emerged. The silence deepened, becoming predatory. A few people coughed nervously. Others stared at their plates, at the ceiling, anywhere but at the small, struggling boy on the stage. Julian Vance, seated at the head table, felt a cold, familiar fury coiling in his gut. It was the fury of an engineer watching a perfectly designed machine inexplicably fail. He had vetted the plan. The speech was short, simple, written by his communications chief. Leo had practiced it for weeks. The best speech therapists in the country, with their 6-figure retainers, had assured him Leo was making progress. This was not progress. This was a public spectacle of his son's, and by extension, his own, imperfection. "Fiona," he sub-vocalized into the tiny microphone on his lapel, his voice a low growl. "Get him off the stage, now." Across the ballroom, his fiercely competent event manager, Fiona, flinched. "Sound booth, kill the mic," she hissed into her headset. "Stage left, escort him off, gently." In the glass-walled sound booth overlooking the glittering affair, Min Tran heard the command. He was a 22-year-old linguistics graduate student, and this gig, running audio for corporate events, was one of 3 jobs he worked to cover his late mother's medical debts and his own tuition. He looked at the frantic, red-faced event manager on his monitor, then at the small, trembling boy on the stage. He saw the panic in Leo's eyes, the profound, soul-deep shame of a child who feels broken. He had seen that look before, in the mirror, years ago. Fiona's voice crackled again, sharp with panic. "Sound booth, did you hear me? Cut the audio!" Min's hand hovered over the master fader. Firing him would be a minor inconvenience for them, a financial catastrophe for him. But then he looked at Julian Vance. He saw the man's clenched jaw, his stony expression, devoid of any fatherly compassion. He saw a man who looked at his son like a failed project. And in that instant, a quiet, fierce rebellion took root in Min's heart. He ignored the fader. Instead, his fingers danced across a different console. He isolated the stage monitor feed. The small speakers on the floor pointed up at the presenter, inaudible to the audience. He brought up a subchannel, a simple sine wave generator. He tapped out a slow, steady rhythm on the console. Thump, thump, thump. A low, gentle pulse, like a calm heartbeat, began to emanate from the speakers at Leo's feet. Then he leaned into his own microphone, routing it not to the main hall, but only to the tiny, wireless earpiece Leo wore. His voice was a soft, steady murmur. "Leo, it's okay. Can you hear the beat? Just breathe with it. In and out. Good. Now, let's not think about the whole speech. just the first word. Can you say it with the beat?" On stage, Leo flinched. The new sound was a surprise, an anchor in the swirling sea of silent, staring faces. The voice was calm, not demanding like his father's, not clinical like his therapist's. It was just there. He closed his eyes, his small chest rising and falling with the gentle pulse. He focused on the first word on the page, the one that had trapped him. Thank. He took a breath with the beat. He let it out with the beat. Thank, he said. The word was quiet, but it was whole. It was clear. A collective, barely audible sigh of relief went through the room. Min's voice was back in his ear, warm with encouragement. Perfect. That was perfect, Leo. Now the next one, same way, just you and the rhythm. You, for, joining, us. It was slow, deliberate, almost hypnotic, but it was happening. One by one, guided by a secret rhythm only he could hear, Leo Vance delivered his speech. He didn't look up from the page, but the tremor in his hands lessened. The hot flush of shame on his cheeks began to recede. When he finally spoke the last word, he risked a glance upward. The entire room, 1,000 powerful and influential people, erupted in applause. It wasn't the polite, obligatory applause from earlier. It was thunderous, genuine, and filled with an emotion Julian Vance rarely encountered: awe. He stood up, ignoring the hands reaching out to congratulate him. He strode towards the backstage area, his mind a maelstrom of questions. Fiona intercepted him, her face pale. "Mr. Vance, I am so sorry about the insubordination from the AV tech. I assure you he has been dismissed and will never work in this city again." "Find him," he commanded, his voice flat and cold. Min was coiling an XLR cable when the imposing Fiona and 2 stone-faced security guards cornered him. "Mr. Vance wants to see you," she said, her voice dripping with a mix of malice and triumph. Min's heart hammered against his ribs. He thought of his overdue rent, of the tuition payment due next month. He had known the risk. He nodded, picked up his worn backpack, and followed them. He was led not to a loading dock, but towards Julian Vance himself, who stood like a statue amidst the backstage chaos. The billionaire's eyes, the color of storm clouds, bored into him. "Your name," he said. It wasn't a question, it was a demand for data. "Min Tran, sir." Julian's gaze was analytical, dismissive, scanning Min's simple clothes, his tired eyes. "My office, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Min standing in the silence, the weight of that summons far heavier than the silence in the ballroom had been.
The Vance Tower was a shard of obsidian and glass piercing the Manhattan sky. It was a monument to ruthless efficiency, a place where sentiment was a liability and every decision was data-driven. As Min Tran stepped into the lobby, the sheer scale of the wealth and power was designed to intimidate. The marble floors reflected his worn sneakers back at him with what felt like disdain. The air itself seemed filtered of all human messiness. On the 88th floor, a severe-looking executive assistant with a nameplate that read Cynthia appraised him coolly. "Mr. Vance will see you now." Julian Vance's office was less a room than a territory. It occupied the entire corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of the city below. Julian stood with his back to the door, gazing out at his kingdom. A single photograph sat on his vast, empty desk, a smiling woman with warm eyes, holding a much younger Leo. "Mr. Tran," Julian said, turning slowly. "Sit." Min sat in the single, brutally modern chair opposite the desk. The silence stretched, a calculated tactic Julian often used to make people unravel. Min, however, remained quiet. He had faced worse silences. "Explain what you did last night," Julian finally said, his voice clipped. "I gave your son a rhythmic anchor. It's a technique based on melodic intonation therapy. Stuttering often involves a dysfunction in the brain's left hemisphere, which controls speech. Rhythm and melody are processed in the right hemisphere. By introducing a rhythmic pulse, you can create a sort of neurobypass, allowing the right hemisphere to assist the left. Julian stared, his mask of control faltering for a fraction of a second. This was not the rambling, apologetic explanation he had expected. You have a background in this. I'm finishing my master's in speech-language pathology at Columbia. My thesis is on non-clinical interventions for childhood fluency disorders. Julian leaned forward, his confusion hardening into suspicion. He was a man who believed in systems, in plans. Was this a setup, a performance to get my attention? Men met his gaze without flinching. No, sir. It was a choice. Your son's event manager ordered me to silence your son, to treat him like a technical error. I chose to treat him like a human being. The directness of the rebuke hung in the air. Julian was not accustomed to being challenged, especially by someone he considered utterly insignificant. He changed tact, reverting to his default mode of operation. I have a proposition for you, he said, his tone shifting from inquisitor to dealmaker. I want you to work for me. You will be Leo's full-time therapeutic companion. You will live in my home. You will have access to any resource you require. I will pay you $500,000 a year. It was a staggering sum, a life-altering amount of money. It would solve every single one of Min's problems. He could pay off the debts, quit his other 2 jobs, focus solely on his studies, and live in a world of unimaginable luxury. He could see the relief, the easy path shimmering before him, and he heard himself say, "No thank you, Mr. Vance." Julian looked as if Min had slapped him. "No? Do you have any idea what you're turning down?" "I do," Min said, and for the first time he allowed a quiet passion to enter his voice. "And I am turning it down because your son is not a portfolio to be managed or a software bug to be patched. He doesn't need a live-in mechanic. He's a child who needs confidence and community, not a highly paid babysitter who reminds him every second that he's a problem to be solved." Julian's face flushed with anger. "You are in no position to lecture me about my son. With all due respect, sir, you put him on that stage last night to serve your image. I put a beat in his ear to serve his spirit. That gives me some small position to speak." Min stood up, his legs feeling steadier than he expected. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn, tri-folded flyer, printed on cheap paper. He placed it carefully in the center of the vast, immaculate desk. It looked like a dandelion growing through concrete. "This is where I work on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's a small public speaking and drama club I started in a community center in Queens. It's called Melody Makers. It's free. We don't fix kids there. We give them a space to find their own voice at their own rhythm." He walked towards the door, then paused, his hand on the handle. "Your money can buy the best therapist in the world, Mr. Vance, but it can't buy dignity. Leo has to find that for himself. All you can do is decide whether you're going to help him look in the right places." He left the office, leaving Julian Vance alone in the silent, cavernous room. The billionaire stared at the cheap flyer. The bold, cheerful letters of Melody Makers seemed to mock the cold, hard lines of his empire. He picked up the photo on his desk. It was of his late wife, Elena. She had been the heart of their family, the one who understood feelings and fears that couldn't be quantified. "You can't optimize a human soul, Julian," she used to tell him, laughing, when he tried to schedule their weekend for maximum efficiency. He had forgotten her voice. He had forgotten her wisdom. Looking at the flyer, for the first time in years, he felt the sharp, painful sting of that loss, and the dawning, terrifying realization that she would have been ashamed of the man he had become.
The following Tuesday, a sleek, black Tesla, a car so out of place it looked like a spaceship, navigated the cracked and potholed streets of a neighborhood in Queens. Julian Vance sat in the driver's seat, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, a knot of profound discomfort in his stomach. In the passenger seat, Leo was silent, looking out the window with a mixture of terror and curiosity. The community center was a squat, brick building, its walls covered in a vibrant, chaotic mural. The name Melody Makers was painted over the door in lopsided, joyful letters. Julian took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of city grit and fried onions from a nearby food cart. It was a world away from the sanitized air of his tower. He pushed open the door and was met with a wave of noise. Not the polite murmur of a gala, but the loud, uninhibited sound of about 15 children, aged 8 to 13, laughing and shouting in a large, brightly lit room with scuffed wooden floors. Men stood in the center of it all, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, a warm smile on his face. He saw them and his smile widened. "Mr. Vance! Leo! Welcome! We're just warming up." Julian stood stiffly by the door, a sentinel of awkward privilege. He watched as the children played an improv game. The prompt was, "The worst birthday party ever." A girl with a severe lisp played a magician whose rabbit had run away. A boy who stuttered more severely than Leo played a clown whose car had broken down. They were clumsy, they stumbled over their words, but they were also hilarious, creative, and most importantly, they were supporting each other, picking up dropped lines, cheering each other's jokes. No one was corrected, no one was judged. Leo, who had been hiding behind his father's leg, slowly took a step forward, a flicker of a smile on his own face. "It's chaos," Julian muttered to a woman who was setting up a folding table with juice boxes. "Is it?" the woman replied, her eyes twinkling. She was older, with elegant gray braids and a commanding presence. "I'm Dr. Anya Sharma. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, and I believe your foundation has rejected my research grant proposal 3 times. Julian froze. He recognized the name instantly. Her proposals had been dense, theoretical, focused on qualitative outcomes and peer-supported neuroplasticity, all terms his board had dismissed as unscalable and lacking hard metrics. "Dr. Sharma," he managed to say, "what are you doing here?" "I'm a co-founder," she said, gesturing around the room. "This isn't just a club, Mr. Vance. This is our pilot program. We are studying, in real time, how non-directive, play-based methodologies can fundamentally remap the neural pathways associated with speech and social anxiety. Min isn't just a kind-hearted student. He is my lead research assistant. His theoretical work on the link between rhythm and expressive confidence is groundbreaking." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The expertise, the refusal of his money. This wasn't just a do-gooder project. It was a serious scientific endeavor he had repeatedly dismissed out of hand. "So the gala was a setup," he said, the old anger returning. "You orchestrated it." "The universe provided an opportunity," Dr. Sharma corrected gently. "Men simply had the courage and competence to take it. He showed you in 90 seconds what my 80-page proposal failed to convey. This works." Just then, a small camera crew from a local news channel entered the room. Dr. Sharma had invited them weeks ago, hoping a small human interest story might attract some much-needed community funding. Their timing was, for Julian, catastrophic. He felt cornered, manipulated. His instinct was to grab Leo and leave, to call his lawyers, to shut this whole thing down. But then he looked at his son. Leo had been coaxed into a small group by another boy. They were working on a short 2-person scene. Leo had a line. He took a visible breath. I think, he started, the old stutter returning under the pressure of being watched. The other boy didn't rush him. He didn't look away. He simply waited, nodding encouragingly. Leo tried again. "I think you are very brave," he said, the words coming out clear and strong. He was talking to the character in the scene, but he was looking at his new friend. It was a small moment, a single line in a noisy room, but for Julian, it was an earthquake. His expensive therapist had tried to drill the stutter out of Leo. Here, in this chaotic room, these children were giving each other the courage to speak through it. The reporter, a young, ambitious woman, suddenly recognized him. Her eyes widened. "Mr. Vance, what a surprise! What is your connection to this amazing program?" she asked, her cameraman swinging the lens towards him. This was the moment, the crossroads. The world was watching. His entire being, conditioned by decades of ruthless control and image management, screamed at him to deny, deflect, and destroy. He could crush this small program, ruin Min and Dr. Sharma for their audacity. It would be easy. He opened his mouth, the scathing dismissal already formed on his tongue. But his gaze fell on Leo, who was now watching him, his eyes wide with a question. "What are you going to do, Dad?" He saw the photo of Elena on his desk, her warm, disappointed eyes. He heard her voice, "You can't optimize a soul, Julian." He looked at the reporter, the camera's red light a baleful eye. And Julian Vance did the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He surrendered. "My connection," he began, his voice rough with an unfamiliar emotion, "is that I have been a fool." A shocked silence fell on the small crowd that had gathered. The reporter's jaw dropped. "My foundation and I have been privileged to fund many large-scale, data-heavy projects, but we have been blind. We failed to see that the most profound innovations are not always found in corporate labs, but in places like this, in human connection." He walked over and put his hand on Leo's shoulder. His son looked up at him, his expression of pure astonishment. "My foundation was wrong to reject Dr. Sharma's research," he announced, his voice ringing with newfound conviction. "And that is a mistake we will begin to correct today. We will be funding Melody Makers for the next 5 years. We will build them a new permanent facility, and we will fund Dr. Sharma's research on a national scale." He looked directly at Min, who stood watching, his expression unreadable. "On one condition, that the program's methodology and mission remain entirely under the control of Dr. Sharma and Mr. Tron. They are the experts. It's time for me to learn how to listen."
1 year later, the Vance Center for Youth Expression opened its doors. It wasn't a sterile glass tower, but a warm, inviting building, designed with input from the children themselves, complete with a small theater, soundproof practice rooms, and a lounge filled with beanbag chairs. Julian Vance was there, not on the stage, but in the audience. He was a frequent visitor, not as a benefactor making inspections, but as a parent, and sometimes a student. He had been seen in the back of workshops, awkwardly participating in improv games, learning the rhythms that had unlocked his son. On the stage, Leo stood at the podium, acting as the master of ceremonies for the opening. He was introducing a new group of melody makers. He still had a slight, rhythmic hesitation in his speech, but it was no longer a source of shame. He wielded it, using its pauses for emphasis, for comedic timing. It was part of him, part of his voice. "True leadership," Julian said quietly to Min, who was sitting beside him, "isn't about having all the answers. It's about being brave enough to listen to the people who do." Min smiled, watching the confident young man on the stage. "He didn't need you to fix him, Mr. Vance. He just needed you to see him." Julian nodded, a genuine, unforced smile reaching his eyes for the first time in a very long time. He wasn't watching a failed project that had been repaired. He was watching his son, whole and unbroken, finding his own glorious, unique voice. And in the proud, quiet applause of the father, the silent rhythm of the son, a new, more beautiful kind of melody filled the room.